Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, and my co-host Justin Baker and I are excited for yet another top 10 all-time, this time New York Islanders.
That's what I live for.
It's the only thing that gets me through my week. I'd say this list, in comparison to others, the top 5 or 4 or so were like, it was just deadlocked. Maybe the order can be different, but there's to me, like, I'm going to be surprised if we have a different top 4.
Yeah, I would agree. Even top 5. I mean, I would be surprised.
There were a few lists that were a little bit different, had some outlier players on there, but if the lists were made by somebody who was an Islanders fan in 1981, then the list is real heavy on those players. But then again, my list is real heavy on those players. Because the Islanders were freaking terrible in the once you get past 93, basically once Mike Milbury takes over, the team is just a dumpster fire.
That's very true. Who trades away Roberto Luongo and Zdeno Chara?
Yeah, on top of that, Brian Berard traded him away.
Right.
And Brian Berard, if Hossa hadn't have ended his career, I know he did come back for a half a season or whatever, but he was literally blind in one eye. And so he had to relearn how to see from one eye. And so all his depth perception is practically gone. You're not going to last long in a league with one freaking eye.
Ooh, rough.
As it gets faster. But that guy, I mean, before you had a lot of defensemen that could really just skate and move the puck during a time when a lot of guys were real big. He was a guy who was finessing his way through, and he won Rookie of the Year with the Islanders and everything. But
did he now?
Yes,
that's right. I always forget that.
I think the Leafs traded Kenny Janssen for him.
Kenny Janssen.
Like the definition of a middling defenseman that everyone thinks is better than he is. Okay, well, with that said, shall we dive into this list?
Let's go.
Okay, obviously Kenny Janssen not on my list.
Thank God.
Who just missed yours?
Right now I got one future maybe superstar. I don't know if you want to call him that yet, but Matthew Barzal.
Okay.
Making my just missed.
If he ever plays with John Tavares again, then maybe
he's playing actually some pretty good 2A hockey right now. But
he's a good player.
Yeah, good player, not superstar, but
I don't know if he ever makes this list. I have my doubts.
Time will tell. Yeah, time will tell.
It always does.
I can't. I also have Ken Morrow making my just missed.
Okay, yep. The only player to ever win the Stanley Cup and a gold medal in the same year.
Wow, I'm glad you know that.
Yeah, that has to have changed.
Oh, I'm sure it has. Yeah, I think
maybe he was the first one to do that. I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, no, I'm sure there were a couple Red Wings from 2002 that won gold and won the cup. Maybe Brendan Shanahan.
Steve Yzerman.
Yeah.
Right? Was he on Team Canada?
I think he was injured during
Brendan
that run.
Shanahan, though.
Shanahan was for sure. Yeah.
But I guess maybe he was the first.
Yeah.
That's probably what it was.
The first. Yeah. Okay. And then Brett Sutter as well, making my just missed.
Okay. Brent Sutter on my list.
Okay.
Missing my list, Brian Berard, who I just talked about.
Yes.
Bob Bourne, who did some damage, but misses my list just barely, and he's 9th all time in scoring, so I'm sure maybe we'll get to him on yours. And then Butch Goring, who I put him on my just missed because different lists had him. I saw him as high as 5 or 6 on some lists that were a little more like New York Islanders heavy. You know, it was like maybe a New York Times, or not New York Times, but some newspaper kind of doing an article about top 10 Islanders, and he was on there because he was rough and tough, and he represented everything the Islanders were, and he was the missing piece of the Islanders before they went. He gets traded to the Islanders at the trade deadline, and they win the cup finally. You know, they had some good teams before that, and they finally break through, win the cup, and said he was largely considered the piece that put them over the top.
That tippity top.
That's fair. Like he very well could have been, but I think he had 150 points, 45th all time, 195 points in 332 games. He had some really nice playoffs, but I'm not willing to put a guy in who is 45th all time in scoring.
Yeah, Matt Molson had a better point per game average as an Islander. So.
Right. Playing in 2000s.
Well, there you go.
You know, there's a few guys that I would put ahead there. I'm sure heart and soul kind of guy. And one more that I'll just throw out because I have his autograph. He is a part of my collection. Is good old Wayne Merrick.
Wayne Merrick.
He scored the Stanley Cup winning goal in 1980, I believe, when they first won the cup.
Kudos to you. All right.
I only know that because I collect Stanley Cup winning goal scorers. So, yeah, that's the only reason why I know him. I truly had never heard of him before until I saw that list and was like, oh, this guy scored a winning goal, and his autograph picture was like $12, probably because he's Wayne Merrick.
The only time we're ever going to say his name on this show.
True that. Let's never say it again. Sorry, Wayne. We'll say Wayne again, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 10.
Yeah, number 10 for me is, you kind of said heart and soul in there a little earlier, and I thought that was a great segue.
Okay.
Heart and soul guy, Josh Bailey for me.
Josh Bailey?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know what? I love this guy. I think he's not a superstar. He's not one of those guys that's going to go out and just drive any line, drive any team per se. But to me, he's just been kind of one of those heart and soul leaders that this team is needed over the last decade, and especially now that Tavares has skipped town, they don't really have much leadership, I would say, outside of he and maybe Nick Leddy. But what kind of leadership do you want to call that, I guess?
Sure,
I don't know. He does sit in the top 10 in terms of games played for this franchise. Not quite yet top 10 in terms of point totals. But again, he's not a guy who's going to go out and put up 80 points. He's more of your Mike Fisher type guy, 50, 60 points.
Yeah, if he stays there for a couple more years, it's likely that he moves into the top 10. Right now at 449, 10 is Bobby Nystrom with 513. So needs like 64 more points to get in there.
And not much of a goal scorer either. So he's a setup guy. And I think, being around guys like, Barzell and maybe Eberle for a couple more years might help him crack that top 10.
Okay. Did not make my list, but I like that you picked somebody who plays currently for the Islanders. He
is the only person on my list that currently plays for the Islanders.
Okay. I don't have anybody on my list that currently plays for the Islanders. My number 10 is a guy actually just below Josh Bailey in all-time scoring, but a guy who is, I think, second all-time in points per game for this franchise, and that is Pierre Turgeon.
Okay.
It's my number 10.
He's a few more spots up on my list.
Okay, yeah, he had 340 points in 255 games for the Islanders, and when you consider the regular seasons that he had with the Islanders, some of the best ever for the franchise, the 132 points that he has in 92-93, with 58 goals, I think is the best season any New York Islanders ever had in terms of points. So he makes my list because he just blew up with the Islanders. He had some a couple nice seasons with the Buffalo Sabres prior to this, but has his best season with the Islanders. And despite the fact that the Islanders, he only went to the playoffs twice with them. In the 92-93 season, he has 13 points in 11 playoff games. So when they got to the playoffs, when they had a good team, he was right there leading that squad. So he's my number 10.
All right, good call. Number 9 for me, one of the best hockey names I've ever heard of, Ziggy Palffy.
Oh yes, Zygmunt Palffy.
Yeah, Zygmunt.
Did he make another? Did he make a list of mine in another? He made the LA Kings list.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah. So he was my number 10 for the LA Kings.
Beautiful.
I didn't make my Islanders list, but
yeah, he actually had some better productive seasons, I guess, if you want to call it that, with the Islanders, but. He amassed an equivalent of 1.000 points per game playing with his team, 331 and 331. And
that's actually an impressive feat.
three straight 40-goal seasons. So especially in the mid-'90s where goals were a little bit harder to come by, and I figure maybe you could equivalate, maybe, like his best season was 90 points for this guy. You could think of it as maybe 110, 15-point season in today's NHL.
If he was playing today, the fact that in 2000, 2001, well, it's with the Kings, but he gets 89 points. But yeah, you're right. He does have some nice seasons with the Islanders.
Yeah, and he could skate. He was
3 straight minimum 43-goal seasons.
Right. Fantastic skater. He played hard for a team that just wasn't very good. You can see they never made the playoffs during his tenure, unfortunately. So that's why I just can't put him higher on this list. And most of the other guys above him have at least made the playoffs.
Okay. My number 9 is Pat LaFontaine. LaFontaine played for the Islanders mostly through the 80s, was drafted 3rd overall in 83, and he had some unreal seasons for this team, most notably a 54-goal season with 105 points. Not his best season of his career. That happens in 92-93. I feel like a ton of players had their best year in 92-93.
That makes sense.
Like all these guys had like 150-point seasons that year.
Yeah, that was like at the peak of Mario and Wayne right before everybody started integrating that left wing lock.
But the peak of like a Mario, or you mean kind of like the end of
that era?
Yeah, because Mario Lemieux has 160 points that year. LaFontaine actually was second in the league in scoring at 148. You've got Oates at 142, Yzerman 137, Solani 132, Turgeon at 132, McGillney 127, Gilmore 127, Robitaille 123, and Recchi 123, or Robitaille 125, Recchi 123. 10 guys with over 120 points.
That's freaking unreal. Freaking unreal.
There was 21 people with over 100 points that year.
We could get there soon too, I think, the way the game's going.
Yeah,
but
I would agree. I mean, that to me is fun.
It is fun.
You don't want to have
for a
everyone
goaltender,
in like
but
87 points leading the league in scoring.
Good God,
sorry,
no.
Jamie Benn, but
I'm not sorry.
But yeah, New York Islanders, Pat LaFontaine, unfortunately drafted right after the Islanders go and win all their cups. But he was there in 93, 94, and or 83, 84 as the Islanders kind of start to fizzle out. They go on a couple long runs. He makes it to the second round a couple times, but really not the greatest playoff performer, but definitely made it happen in the playoffs. And a guy who I think if he had played now, he would have been an even better player. Like he was small. He was 5'10", 183, and at that time that was tiny.
That's when guys would destroy you.
He was real tiny. I want to say that he had some injury kind of stuff happened to him. I think it was concussions. Yeah, it was concussions with Pat LaFontaine. I mean, you look at early in his career, rookie season, he only plays 15 games. That wasn't due to injury, but then it's 67, 65. He really only played a full season one time his whole career. So unfortunately, we didn't get to see maybe vintage LaFontaine all the way through, but he's my number 9.
All right, that's fair. At number 8 for me, I have a guy who's already made your list. That is Pierre Turgeon.
Okay.
So we've talked about him, and I'm just going to skip along and skip over your number 8 and just say at number 7 for me is Pat LaFontaine.
All right.
So
all right. So you just kind of have those guys notched a little higher.
A little bit higher. So your number 8 then.
My number 8 is a guy who was a part of, I believe, all 4 Stanley Cup winning teams. And I want to say that he scored the Stanley Cup winning goal in one of those years. John Tonelli is the man. I think he scored a bit, like I think it was in overtime, but maybe it wasn't in the final game. But I know it's Tonelli and Nystrom have this back and forth feed with each other, and they score the Stanley Cup winning goal. But yeah, John Tonelli, member of all 4 Stanley Cups. And I mean, in 81, 82, he's putting up 93 points. A little bit later, after those cup winning years, he put up 100 points for this team. And he always was a guy who was showing up in the playoffs. I know he was a mean player to play against too, but always had it. He had at least 13 points in all their cup runs, 16, 13, 16, and 18 points. So was a crucial member of that cup run, and almost went to the finals or won the cup again in 85-86 with the Flames, where they fell short.
Right, yeah.
He had 16 points there. So John Tonelli, my number 8.
Very nice.
And he won the gold with Team Canada in the Canada Cup in 84.
That's true. Almost turned down an invitation, too. I was just reading about that. And, could you imagine just turning that one down?
Well, yeah, why would you do that?
I don't know. An idiot.
All right. So your number 7 was LaFontaine. My number 7 is a guy who just missed your list, and that is Brent Sutter.
Okay.
He is 9th all time in games played. and he's 6th all-time in points. He's got 610 points in 694 games. He won 2 cups with the Islanders. He was there for his last 2. He was 19 and 20 years old, and he also, that guy, he won multiple golds in the World Championships with Team Canada. He was a part of that 87 Canada Cup team that was just going to destroy everybody. In 84-85, he had his best season, 102 points in 72 games. So Brent Sutter, though, comes in, midway through the Islanders' dominance, and in his rookie season in the playoffs with 8 points in 19 games, and the following year, 21 points in 20 games. So definitely a big, as a team, it's your 4th year in the Stanley Cup Finals, looking to four-peat. Like, you need to have some fresh blood, and Brent Sutter definitely was that. On top of that, he was a mean SOB. He had over 1,000 penalty minutes in 1,100 games, so almost a penalty minute per game. So not afraid to get into fights, because when you look at his stats, he's got several seasons that end in 65 penalty minutes, 105 penalty minutes.
Pretty good.
So, all right, that's my number 7, Brent Sutter.
All right. Well, number 6 then. For me, Clark Giles.
Clark Gillies.
Gillies, yeah.
Gillies, yeah. Yeah, Clark Gillies. 4th all-time in scoring, 872 games, so he's 4th all-time also in games. Just in front of Josh Bailey.
That's very true.
Who will probably pass Clark Gillies this year, barring a healthy season.
That's very true.
But yeah, also
big part of those cup runs.
Yeah, all 4 cup runs.
All 4, yeah.
He definitely he was a little bit. He was good in all those years. It was, I think, kind of his body was starting to wear down. He was starting to miss games later on there after the Islanders stopped winning cups. He kind of stopped. Like, you're talking cup year, he's got 54, 78, 77, and then it just falls off 41, 28, 32. Like, he kind of has a little bit more of a role playing, just that third line outside instead of playing higher up where he was earlier on in those cup runs.
Yeah, he was also a captain at one point for the Islanders. And he was also nominated for, he never made top 3, but he also got some votes for the Selke. So had a little bit of two-way game to his game.
Probably the, maybe where you have Josh Bailey as that, like,
heart and soul
kind of guy. Pretty similar there, too.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we both have him at number 6. My number 5 is the only guy in my top 5 that has played in the last 20 years, and that's John Tavares.
Same. He comes in at number 5 for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, 5th all-time in scoring, almost a point per game, 621 and 669 games. Didn't have a lot of playoff success with the Islanders. I mean, obviously we know they made it to the second round once, and that was the year that they beat the Florida Panthers in Game 7 in overtime.
I remember that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And John Tavares scored the goal. So then they go on to get swept in the following round. And that was
embarrassing.
So, and obviously very little playoff success with the Maple Leafs thus far.
Best player the Islanders have had the last 10 years, by far.
Yes. And one thing to note is the fact that he does have 27 points in 31 playoff games, which, like, in modern hockey, that's fantastic. You're almost at a point per game in the playoffs. You're doing something right. It obviously isn't his fault that his team did go far.
Had nobody else on it.
Nobody.
Besides Kyle Poso and Matt Molson.
Yeah. All the guys that John Tavares got helped to get paid.
Right. In Buffalo, nonetheless.
Okay. Here goes the top 4. Everybody has these 4 guys in their top 4. Now it's just a matter of how highly rated do you make a goaltender? Because I think that's what changes your order. If you put more stock into Billy Smith, who's the goaltender for all 4 Stanley Cups, he might be a little higher. I saw him as high as 2. No, not going 1, but I only saw 2 different players at number 1. And so where do you have Billy Smith in your top 4?
At 4.
Okay, so do I.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you look at the Islanders. Definitely the most fascinating goalie rundown, I think, in the entire history of the league, because their second winningest goaltender was their backup goalie.
Right, during all those cup runs.
Chico Resch. He got 157 wins and only 69 losses. 25 of those games were shutouts. Billy Smith played 674 games and Resch played 282 for the Islanders. Resch has 3 more shutouts than Billy Smith.
Yeah, Billy Smith never had a season where he had more than 3 shutouts. Never. I mean, and he actually had, well, let me see, 1, 2, 3. I mean, yeah, about 4 seasons where he actually had 0 shutouts. So that's, again, another reason when you look at the numbers, right? Yes, he came up with the wins, and I think a lot of that had to do with the team in front of him more than his actual play, because when you look at the numbers, there wasn't really anything impressive. And I mean, even for that era, right, you don't expect a lot of guys to have outstanding numbers like you do today, where it's like 2.10 or
8, 9, like somewhere in the high 80s for save percentage.
Low 900s.
Is okay.
Absolutely.
And anywhere below like 3.3 goals against average is pretty standard for that time. But I mean, Chico Resch, 256, a 911 save percentage, like
pretty good when you compare it to Billy Smith's numbers.
Yeah.
And the same team in front of him.
Billy Smith, 485 penalty minutes, and he scored a goal.
He did score a goal.
Was that. So maybe that's why he didn't get the shout. He kept trying to score goals, and it would get intercepted, and they get scored on. Maybe
stupid.
No, but nevertheless, I think it's pretty clear from what people have to say about Billy Smith. I've only seen highlights of Islanders winning the Cups in those years, but I think largely considered the most athletic goaltender at the time. Maybe until like a Grant Fuhr comes in and is.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
A little smaller and athletic, but Billy Smith not only that, I'm pretty sure he was a pretty big guy. No, he was 5'10". Just kidding. He wasn't a big guy. So, yeah. Well, he also played for the Islanders his whole career. Like, how many goalies do you see that play for one team their whole career? Like, it's Martin Brodeur.
And
that's all I can, like, honestly, as far as like a Hall of Fame goaltender goes, I can't think of too many that stuck around with
Ken
the same
Dryden
team.
But that was
'cause
injury
he only
related.
played like 8 years.
Yeah.
No, he just retired.
Oh, that's true. Yeah,
I
he did.
just don't want to play anymore, because I think he was in a contract dispute and just said, I don't need to play. That's fine.
It's true. He had the TV deals going on afterwards anyway. So
yep.
ABC picked him
a
up.
politician. I'll say this about Billy Smith. The way the Islanders deployed him is like, now. How has nobody ever looked at what the Islanders did and go, wow, they won 4 Stanley Cups and they're starting goalie. The most games he ever started in a year, 46.
Yeah, fresh. Keep him fresh.
Dude, he was ready to roll.
And I keep hearing debates now, too. There's a lot of teams, especially Toronto pops up in this one a lot because you have such backup goaltender issues where they're like, oh, we should consider starting Anderson on back-to-back nights.
But when your goalies are that bad, I mean,
sure.
Chico Resch is basically a Hall of Fame goaltender in and of himself.
He was pretty good, yeah.
Because he was good before he came, or after he left New York. He goes to the Devils and has some. He was on a real bad Devils team, but he kind of, I don't know, he had to keep that ship afloat, I guess, as best as he could. But I mean, that's when he goes to the Colorado Rockies and then he comes over to the Devils. I mean, he played 61 and 65 games for those teams in a couple years and had some rough seasons.
The Devils were bad. Real bad.
But nevertheless, Chico Resch, yeah, I mean, he was only there for the 1980 Stanley Cup championship. So only there for their first one. But before that was still their backup goalie, Billy Smith. So okay, so that leaves us with 1, 2, 3.
3 guys.
Let's do your number 2.
Number 2. The Deuce, Denny Potvin.
Denny Potvin. Me as well.
Nice. Yeah. I looked at Trottier and I thought, you know what? Okay, this guy gets to center, who in my opinion might be the best goal scorer the NHL's ever seen. Maybe greater than Ovi, greater than Gretzky in my opinion, easily. Yeah, his pure talent is outstanding in terms of when you look at Bossy's goal scoring totals. And for anybody who centers a guy like that, I think it's easy to rack up a lot of points. Now, Trottier did go out and he did put up some 40-goal, 30-goal seasons, which, again, maybe back then wasn't as hard. I mean, that would be the equivalent of maybe trying to put up 20, 25 this year. But still, you get to play with Mike Bossy, and it's easy to acquire points where I think Denny Potvin, in a time where there weren't a lot of defensemen putting up big numbers, he just annihilated. I mean, you had your Paul Coffeys and your Orrs, but outside of that, there weren't a ton of guys putting up giant numbers like that.
I mean, he still had 5 seasons where he had over 70 assists.
Right.
And 3 other ones where he had over 60. 3 others where he had over 50. So
the guy's numbers were incredible.
He was a setup machine. He also, he had 6 100-point seasons and 2 other 95 and 96-point seasons.
Yeah, 3 Norris trophies. I mean, he's got the hardware to go
I'm
with
talking
it.
about Brian Trottier.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Switching
Denny
gears.
Potvin did equally as. I mean, the fact that he scored so many points. He almost is a point per game.
Yeah.
Unreal.
He was, just about 8 points underneath a point per game, which for a defenseman is unreal.
The fact that he never won the Hart Trophy is like, as a defenseman, he had 101 points.
He came in at number 2 at the Hart,
Number
I think
2
in
in 75, yeah.
76, but
That year
Bobby Clark got it that year. That's right.
Was a year that I believe it was I believe it was that year in the playoffs. They're playing the Leafs. Oh no, was it 77, 78? There was a year that this team was playing the Leafs in the playoffs, and the Leafs came back down 3-0 and beat the Islanders.
Oh yeah, the first time ever.
That Lanny McDonald scores the game-winning goal in OT, and the Leafs
The
win.
mustache.
Yeah. It wasn't the first time it ever happened. The first time it ever happened was against the Red Wings, and the Leafs did it to them. Like the 50s or something like that.
It was 54, I think, 55.
Okay, so you've got Denny Potvin at 2, as do I, which my guess, after hearing you gush about Mike Bossy, he's your number 1.
Clearly.
And Brian Trottier is your number 3. And like I said, we had the same exact top 6. It just was kind of fell into place. I saw one list that had Brian Trottier at number 1. And the only way that I think you could justify that is the amount of games played. You know, I guess you could go, well, he just didn't play Bossy didn't play the amount of games. That's about it. That's all you got. He's second.
That's a hard argument to make.
The guy in 752 games had over 1,100 points. In over 1,100 games, Trottier had 1,300 points. Like, the guy was just almost 1.5 points per game and 0.76 goals per game, which is unheard of.
He only had one season where he didn't score 50 or more goals, Mike Bossy. And that was in his last year when he was going through all those back problems.
Yep.
That forced him to retire. And he still put up 38.
38 in 63 games. If he had played the whole season, he probably would have got 50.
Absolutely.
He got 60 many times.
4 times. 4 freaking times.
Crazy that his second year was his biggest goal scoring season, but 69 goals. 69, 68, 64. Jeez, it's crazy.
Never won the Hart, though, which always surprised me. Like, for a guy who was that important and that good of a goal scorer, just never got the Hart.
Wins the Bing 3 times.
Right.
But, I mean, if you think about it, like, you're going up against Gretzky, so...
That's very true. And you had Bobby Clark. And
Bossy ends up with his... Now, granted, his 126-point season, and his 69 goals, and that is the year that he did 50 and 50. So you get 50 goals in 50 games, then he only scores 19 in the next 30. I guess maybe that's...
that could hurt you.
Maybe, but still... I mean, that's just that's like a bias towards the end of the season. Who has a hot streak? Like, remember that year that Corey Perry went on a crazy hot streak at the end and scored a ton of goals? Everyone just kind of forgot about what happened in the first 40 games. Just remembered the rest. Ironically, though, Brian Trottier actually wins the Hart the year that he gets his 69 goals.
Okay.
So Brian Trottier ends up with 87 assists. Also, Denny Potvin was 4th in Hart voting when he had his 101. That's the year he had his 101-point season. So I guess, unfortunately for Bossy, he scores 69 goals, and a defenseman on his team gets 101, 70 assists. 2 guys on his team had, between the two of them, 157 assists.
That's crazy.
And Gretzky still had more than that.
I know.
Yeah, in 1 year. Okay, well, that's our New York Islanders list. I mean, if you have something else, try and convince us why, because I certainly can't come up with any reason why you would ever put Brian Trottier ahead of Mike Bossy at least in terms of like, hey, he was the best. Maybe if it's like, all right, he played a ton of games and he was the captain. I guess you can make the argument that, all right, he goes on to win the cup with the Penguins a couple years, but he really was just like a role player for those Penguins
at
teams.
that point.
Really
Yeah,
didn't do a whole lot. He had 14 points in 44 games in those 2 playoff runs. But yeah, I mean, Brian Trottier, really nice player. Obviously, like a great Hall of Fame guy. Steve Yzerman constantly compared to him, but I'll take Steve Yzerman all day.
absolutely, absolutely.
100%. All right, well, that's our list. You can hit us up on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk and let us know what you thought of it. And we will talk to you guys soon.